Star Wars Galaxy's Edge has been open for 5 years, and it's awesome, but how can we make it even better? You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, thanks for joining me here on episode 233 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. This episode is another in a series of armchair Imagineering episodes where I give my thoughts and then respond to a lot of your ideas plus ideas from former podcast guests. Our focus today is Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. The Disneyland version originally opened May 31st, 2019, which makes it perfect timing here as we are a little over 5 years from when it opened, like I mentioned on the intro. And I'm calling this episode again, Some to Spatial Birth, Updating Galaxy's Edge, because I think there are some really good things about the land, especially Star Wars Rise of the Resistance, mostly Smuggler's Run. Some of the Upcharge experience is supposed to be really cool. You got some characters moving around. You got a lot of attention to detail. Pretty cool stuff. But how could we update it to even improve on that? Get ready for a lot of discussion on everything that is going on at Galaxy's Edge. I'm going to give my points and then dive into a lot of yours. So many great ideas have been submitted, some audio from friends of the show. This is going to be great, and I hope you enjoy this ride. And all taken not from a critical perspective, but from a we are fans and we think it could be even better. That's the approach that I am taking to this episode. So let's do it. Let's go talk about updating Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. All right, well, I am going to start with my ideas, and then I promise there will be a few breaks where other people are talking. Didn't get as many audio submissions this time, but still got a lot of cool ideas, but at least you will get a little break from me going on. And I'm going to do something here because as I have proven in many trip reports and other podcasts, I can talk for a long time. If I'm not careful, I'll just go off on a bunch of tangents and I'll blink and we'll be at 45 minutes in this episode. And I'll have not gotten to any other ideas. I want the focus of this episode is to be other ideas. But I do like giving mine. It's fun. And I have a lot of them. There will be some crossover here with ideas people give afterwards. But I promise that I tried not to look that closely while I was coming up with my own ideas with others so that I wasn't just repeating really cool ideas that you have submitted. And I'm going to do something else here. I'm going to set a timer on myself. I'm going to set a 20-minute timer. And I know the time might not line up if I edit, if I cough, if I say, oh, whatever. But it's going to be about that. It'll actually probably be slightly less for all of you. But I'm going to set a timer, and it's going to go off, and I'm going to stop. So I'm going to cover as much as I can, try to make sure I hit all my points, kind of treat it like a little test on myself. Can I narrow down all my ideas for Galaxy's Edge in this amount of time? Because I have a lot of ideas in a lot of different areas. There are some parts that I've never done Savi's Workshop. I've never done the Droid Depot solely due to money, not due to having anything against them. I've heard they're really cool experiences. I've also did not do the Galactic Star Cruiser, though that will come up as we come through. Especially, I did not plan this episode to connect directly at all to the recent very popular video by Amy Nicholson. And I have not watched it yet, but I plan to. But we may talk a little bit about that in the future. But I'm going to dive in. We're getting ready to start the timer here and then just give a lot of thoughts here. Get ready. Okay, here we go. I am starting the 20-minute timer. You should hear when it ends. All right, well, to me, the biggest thing that right away you need to do with Galaxy's Edge is focus on the overall approach to making a more vibrant atmosphere. So this all is connected with the idea that timelines you can have the timelines in the individual attractions. Rise of the Resistance being a Resistance versus First Order can totally make sense. You can have characters from the new films. I'm not saying we should get rid of any of that. I'm just saying, just chill on all the timeline idea. I feel like it was interesting. They took a good shot at it. They tried to do something very different, but people have spoken. You see the excitement when they say they're going to bring in Mando and Grogu or Fennec Shan or Boba Fett. And that would go to the nth degree if you brought in more characters from the original trilogy and not just Darth Vader, like all kinds of characters. I want to read this quote quickly from Scott Trowbridge. This is when they announced they were bringing in like Fennec Shan and the Mandalorian and stuff. Here's Scott. We are committed to the long history of Batuu and the collection of amazing characters who inhabit the outpost, including our legacy characters and original characters, and know that we will feel the same about new and future characters from the ever-expanding galaxy Star Wars storytelling. While we as visitors may be able to experience different stories throughout Star Wars history, the characters on Batuu cannot. They will remain in their specific story and timeline and won't intersect with other characters or stories that would not be appropriate for them. Oh, Scott. Well, it's interesting, too, because this was part of the announcement of Boba Fett and Fennec Shan being added. And that Mandalorian and Grogu were going to be there later at the time. This is from an article on May 27, 2022. And then he kind of undercuts it by still talking about the timeline. And it's like, at this point, we're all going there to have a great time. We want there to be some semblance of immersion, but really, do we? Because I think about I watched a live stream on May the 4th of all the people holding up the lightsabers, and you had people that were really good with the lightsabers, swinging them around, everybody chanting all these different names and stuff. That's fun. That sense of fun and excitement should be at Galaxy's Edge every day. I don't mean they should have all those people with lightsabers. That was a bit much. But that sense of fun. So on that note, we need more characters. And I say this in the fact that they have added a few, but still, I've been to Galaxy's Edge this year. I went last summer. Yes, I saw Mando and Grogu briefly. I saw other characters when I was there, saw Chewbacca, everything else. It's still too dead. There's just not enough. The area is so big, and the characters don't have to be doing, I'm going to undercut what I'm about to say in a minute, but don't have to be doing all kinds of crazy things. They just have to be walking around and living in this world. And yes, you don't have to have Darth Vader and Kylo Ren standing next to each other, but just put them in the land. It's okay. In one sense, that would be a kind of fourth wall breaking fun in a way. And so I think you need to think in terms of how do we make this a celebration of Star Wars, a celebration of what we love. You can still have the immersion. You can still have the individual experiences. Savi's can be its own thing. Oga's can be its own thing. But what would it be like if a character just walked into Oga's and hung out? And, something really funny where they got a drink. I'm not, they're on the clock or whatever, but they went up and got a drink. And I know they get mobbed. And in this world of Instagram and everything and TikTok, it would be really hard. But how exciting would that be? The idea that anything could happen on any day. You have that a little bit with the Stormtroopers, who are very funny, and Kylo Ren and everything else. There's a little bit of that. They need to take that to the nth degree and continue to do that. Also, I want to see live bands, or even to travel. Star Wars Galaxy's Edge has been open for 5 years, and it's awesome. But how can we make it even better? You're listening to the Tomorrow Society Podcast. Hey there, thanks for joining me here on episode 233 of the Tomorrow Society Podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. This episode is another in a series of armchair Imagineering episodes where I give my thoughts and then respond to a lot of your ideas, plus ideas from former podcast guests. Our focus today is Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. The Disneyland version originally opened May 31st, 2019, which makes it perfect timing here as we are a little over 5 years from when it opened, like I mentioned on the intro. And I'm calling this episode again, Similar to Spatial Birth, Updating Galaxy's Edge, because I think there are some really good things about the land, especially Star Wars Rise of the Resistance, mostly Smuggler's Run. Some of the upcharge experience is supposed to be really cool. You got some characters moving around. You got a lot of attention to detail. Pretty cool stuff. But how could we update it to even improve on that? Get ready for a lot of discussion on everything that is going on at Galaxy's Edge. I'm going to give my points and then dive into a lot of yours. So many great ideas have been submitted, some audio from friends of the show. This is going to be great, and I hope you enjoy this ride. And all taken not from a critical perspective, but from a we are fans and we think it could be even better. That's the approach that I am taking to this episode. So let's do it. Let's go talk about updating Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. All right, well, I am going to start with my ideas, and then I promise there will be a few breaks where other people are talking. Didn't get as many audio submissions this time, but still got a lot of cool ideas. But at least you will get a little break from me going on. And I'm going to do something here because, as I have proven in many trip reports and other podcasts, I can talk for a long time. If I'm not careful, I'll just go off on a bunch of tangents and I'll blink and we'll be at 45 minutes in this episode. And I'll have not gotten to any other ideas. I want the focus of this episode is to be other ideas. But I do like giving mine. It's fun. And I have a lot of them. There will be some crossover here with ideas people give afterwards. But I promise that I tried not to look that closely while I was coming up with my own ideas with others so that I wasn't just repeating really cool ideas that you have submitted. And I'm going to do something else here. I'm going to set a timer on myself. I'm going to set a 20-minute timer. And I know the time might not line up if I edit, if I cough, if I say, oh, whatever. But it's going to be about that. It'll actually probably be slightly less for all of you. But I'm going to set a timer, and it's going to go off, and I'm going to stop. So I'm going to cover as much as I can, try to make sure I hit all my points, kind of treat it like a little test on myself. Can I narrow down all my ideas for Galaxy's Edge in this amount of time? Because I have a lot of ideas in a lot of different areas. There are some parts that I've never done Savi's Workshop. I've never done the Droid Depot solely due to money, not due to having anything against them. I've heard they're really cool experiences. I've also did not do the Galactic Star Cruiser, though that will come up as we come through, especially, I did not plan this episode to connect directly at all to the recent very popular video by Amy Nicholson. And I have not watched it yet, but I plan to. But we may talk a little bit about that in the future. But I'm going to dive in. We're getting ready to start the timer here and then just give a lot of thoughts here. Get ready. Okay, here we go. I am starting the 20-minute timer. You should hear when it ends. All right, well, to me, the biggest thing that right away you need to do with Galaxy's Edge is focus on the overall approach to making a more vibrant atmosphere. So this all is connected with the idea that timelines you can have the timelines in the individual attractions. Rise of the Resistance being a Resistance versus First Order can totally make sense. You can have characters from the new films. I'm not saying we should get rid of any of that. I'm just saying just chill on all the timeline idea. I feel like it was interesting. They took a good shot at it. They tried to do something very different. But people have spoken. You see the excitement when they say they're going to bring in Mando and Grogu or Fennec Shan or Boba Fett. And that would go to the nth degree if you brought in more characters from the original trilogy and not just Darth Vader, like all kinds of characters. I want to read this quote quickly from Scott Trowbridge. This is when they announced they were bringing in like Fennec Shan and the Mandalorian and stuff. Here's Scott. We are committed to the long history of Batuu and the collection of amazing characters who inhabit the outpost, including our legacy characters and original characters, and know that we will feel the same about new and future characters from the ever-expanding Galaxy Star Wars storytelling. While we as visitors may be able to experience different stories throughout Star Wars history, the characters on Batuu cannot. They will remain in their specific story and timeline and won't intersect with other characters or stories that would not be appropriate for them. Oh, Scott. Oh, Scott. Well, it's interesting, too, because this was part of the announcement of Boba Fett and Fennec Shand being added. And that Mandalorian and Grogu were going to be there later at the time. This is from an article on May 27, 2022. And then he kind of undercuts it by still talking about the timeline. And it's like, at this point, we're all going there to have a great time. We want there to be some semblance of immersion, but really, do we? Because I think about, I watched a live stream on May the 4th of all the people holding up the lightsabers, and you had people that were really good with the lightsabers swinging them around, everybody chanting all these different names and stuff. That's fun. That's fun. That sense of fun and excitement should be at Galaxy's Edge every day. I don't mean they should have all those people with lightsabers. That was a bit much. But that sense of fun. So on that note, we need more characters. And I say this in the fact that they have added a few, but still, I've been to Galaxy's Edge this year. I went last summer. Yes, I saw Mando and Grogu briefly. I saw other characters when I was there, saw Chewbacca, everything else. It's still too dead. There's just not enough. The area is so big, and the characters don't have to be doing, I'm going to undercut what I'm about to say in a minute, but don't have to be doing all kinds of crazy things. They just have to be walking around and living in this world. And yes, you don't have to have Darth Vader and Kylo Ren standing next to each other, but just put them in the land. It's okay. In one sense, that would be a kind of fourth wall breaking fun in a way. And so I think you need to think in terms of how do we make this a celebration of Star Wars, a celebration of what we love. You can still have the immersion. You can still have the individual experiences. Savi's can be its own thing. Oga's can be its own thing. But what would it be like if a character just walked into Oga's and hung out? And, something really funny where they got a drink. I'm not, they're on the clock or whatever, but they went up and got a drink. And I know they get mobbed. And in this world of Instagram and everything and TikTok, it would be really hard. But how exciting would that be? The idea that anything could happen on any day. You have that a little bit with the Stormtroopers, who are very funny, and Kylo Ren and everything else. There's a little bit of that. They need to take that to the nth degree and continue to do that. Also, I want to see live bands or even a traveling musician. Think about I'm going to mention the Galactic Star Cruiser now, how they had that guy who was just like a musician who walked around and everything. What if you had a character like that who was just hanging out in various spots? On the Animal Kingdom, Divine would just show up in random spots. Why not have this guy who sometimes is playing in one spot, sometimes he's somewhere else? People would follow that guy. And yes, again, it would be a challenge, but you could find a way to do that. I think people in general, not everyone, are pretty respectful of characters like that when they're clearly having a good time and you hire people that are good at this. Again, you got a lot of people that were on the Galactic Star Cruiser. I'm not saying you have to just hire all those actors, but that type of actor. Have different Imperial people. Have them make characters. You could do so much. Think of the Disney Park blog articles where you introduce these new characters that are going to be wandering around. You add that in with legacy characters. What if 1 month, all of a sudden, you just had some bounty hunters that were like the ones from Empire Strikes Back that people love? Not just Boba Fett, like Bossk or something. What if you did that? There's so much they could do there. And that's where the Galactic Star Cruiser, from everything I've seen, did well, where you had kind of these characters and these people. The actors went so into their characters, the ones that did it well, and got into it. What if, Gaia was there, and granted, what if you just had a night where she performed? You put up a stage down by Millennium Falcon on a weekend and she performed or something. What if you did something like that? People would love that. It would be so much fun. And again, the idea of making it unique and having it be something where it's like, we have this great landscape to play and to try special events and to try to do various things. There is so much potential for that. And I think that's where some of the criticism came, where initially, when they announced Galaxy's Edge, they said, what you did, imagine doing something on Smuggler's Run and the bounty hunter coming into Oga's and telling you did a bad job. I always thought that seemed a little far-fetched. But that idea where maybe it's not based on what you do, and I find the stuff on the phone just hard to do, but what if there was various people wandering around. What if somebody was just like at Ronto Roasters? Or what, I know you don't want to interfere with the food service and everything else, but what if somebody just like got a blue milk and what if you just saw like a character like walking around, like Chewbacca walking around drinking a blue milk? I mean, just weird stuff like that. People love that stuff so much. And on a related note, I was going to mention this later, but I'm going to say it now. They should bring back Star Wars weekends in some form. They don't have to be exactly how they were before. But again, you could get, you could get Ashley Eckstein, I'm sure, but you could get plenty of different actors to come and, hang out. And you could do special events. And if you have to do it somewhere else in Hollywood Studios, that's cool too. It doesn't have to be the same as it was, but don't make it an upcharge event. Make it a daily thing. That time, you get into May, it's not a super busy time. What if you just had Star Wars weekends in May, not just the 4th, but all the way through May? That'd be a great way to liven up and bring a lot more people. And maybe you have something where there's an upcharge thing at night, but during the day, it's still fun so that everyone can do it. Bring this ongoing festival atmosphere to Galaxy's Edge. They need a sense of fun. It needs to be a place that people want to go and just hang out at all day. I know people say they do that now, but you could add so much more and make it even better. When I talked to Eric Baker, who basically led the group, who put all the props and set dressing and everything there, he said his regret was he didn't have more time because they could have filled out the land more. Focus on that too. You could do so much more. And I've already almost had half of my time. This is why I like this restriction, because it's going to make me cut things down a bit here in terms of what I say. Also, I mentioned live music. I would love to see a band play. You have a makeshift stage right up there. I would love to see. We have a local Star Wars fan fest where they always have a band playing Star Wars music. I would love something like that. That would be so much fun, and it would add so much life to the land, where if you weren't somebody like my wife Erin, she couldn't go on Smuggler's Run. But you got a band playing, there's something else going on at Galaxy's Edge, we might want to hang out there more. It's another thing. Also, it'd be fun to have a stunt show. At the end of the Galactic Star Cruiser, you have the whole Rey-Kylo Ren fight. What if you did that a couple times a day? What if, they had that on opening night, but what if you found a way you could somehow segregate it off? Maybe the area where you came in from the Star Cruiser could be blown out and expand the land and then make that some sort of, you could have a stage or, there's a way to do it where you make some sort of stunt show or performance or anything else that would really add to it. Okay, I want to have time to get to the attractions. Rise of the Resistance. The main thing I would say is just making sure all the effects work. That is something that's become a challenge. We've already had effects turned off. Riding that with the Kylo Ren animatronic is a very different experience from riding it without, even though I appreciate that they don't have to shut down the ride. And it's not as important as the Nave Shaman going down, but it still does make a difference. But you need to find, I would say that shut it down. Find the slowest time possible, shut it down for a month, and just make sure everything works. The second thing I've really noticed is the line inside when you get to the stormtroopers has become very long. And that does take you out of the story a bit, where even when you buy an individual lightning lane, you've waited in line, you can wait a little while. And I know the idea is you're prisoners, you're being transferred, but it starts to feel a little too much like a line. But the biggest thing I would say for Rise of the Resistance is new effects. Bring in Daniel Joseph, who's been on this show, who did do some of the effects, and his team was involved with the lightsaber through the ceiling, which is a really cool effect. Find ways to add effects. Make sure all your effects work, but add things that are unexpected. Like, they just added some projection effects to Muppet Vision 3D. What else can you do? Think about that. During that refurb, don't announce it until it comes back and there's new things. Could you involve live actors in the attraction beyond when they get you in the car? Is there some way you could have people that are like firing and shooting and rebels that are going through, and maybe not all the time, but I know there's issues where you have to be really careful when it's something that's complicated with ride vehicles and everything else, but you could find spots where they could be. How cool would that be to have live actors in there? And find ways to add animatronics. If you can't do that, you got that Finn, isn't that great? They don't need to be the most complicated ones, but can you add other rebels? Can you add more Stormtrooper animatronics? What can you do that is, those cost a lot, but it's not, $100 million, but find ways to plus it. But the bigger attraction that really needs to be plus, that we're going to hear a lot about in a little while, is Smuggler's Run. The obvious thing that a lot of people say is more missions, and I think that we've seen how popular, regardless of the line, the satisfaction has gone through the roof for Star Tours with them adding additional missions. Every time you bring in new missions, like they did with Ahsoka, I mean, they're not missions on Star Tours, but new destinations, you bring in, people come back, and they, oh, I really like that. I haven't been on that for a while. Super cool stuff to keep changing it up. Smuggler's Run, I mean, think of how excited people get about the Chewie mode or the little differences. Think of how it could be if there were, if nothing else, you have to get the coaxium, but you're going to different planets. Or what about the potential of being able to fly into the Death Star? I know that Hondo being involved is kind of weird. How do you deal with that? But maybe Hondo, somehow he's talking and it gets interrupted by some missive from Princess Leia or from, if you want to stick with, whomever. What if you're able to fly the Millennium Falcon through the Death Star? How popular would that be? It would be incredible. Or what about a daytime planet that you could fly through? You think about the Jakku destination video they have for destination video. This is what happens when I try to talk straight for about 20 minutes. They have for Star Tours. Think about that, like flying through something like that, like the escape that Rey has to do, doing something like that, or where you're trying to, you get diverted and this is where you have to go. So many possibilities there. And we're going to hear more about that later, so I'll stop now, but I'm going to talk about that more. But I will say Smuggler's Run, I love the cube. I think the Millennium Falcon the pre area is great. I don't even mind too much being a gunner or engineer. I just want different things to do. Quickly talking about dining, to me, the bigger deal than even having a sit-down restaurant, which would be cool, would be to add food stands. You think about the shawarma stand at Avengers Campus, multiple stands. You could have people, in character selling kind of odd food, but which is really not that odd. Kind of like how Satuli Canteen is kind of supposed to be like it's alien, but it's not really. Same idea here, but have food stands and they could rotate things. That's what I was talking about, the festival atmosphere. You could have individual food and drinks. You could say, this food comes from this alien planet and have it be a real planet in the Star Wars universe. This drink is a special drink that the Gungans like, or anything like that. Make it a upbeat, fun place where, again, Disney, and also you make more money. You can make more money. That's the thing, food and drinks, or even special merchandise for these, like I said with Star Wars Weekends, merchandise killer. Star Wars seemed to be really, I wouldn't say in trouble, but after Rise of Skywalker, no matter how much it made, it seemed to be hurting a little bit. I feel like there has been a bit of a renaissance with Disney pulling back from films, with Mandalorian still being really popular, but especially I've noticed it with Andor and Ahsoka, and I think it's going to continue with The Acolyte. Based on everything I've seen, Obi-Wan wasn't my favorite, but still had interesting parts to it, I would say. But I think that we're here to stay in terms of kind of a different approach to Star Wars, more down to earth, more individual stories. And I would like to see that excitement and kind of renaissance of Star Wars to really permeate into Galaxy's Edge. So I've still got 5 minutes and I'm doing so well. But I will say, I did want to mention that I think they need more attractions. All the things I mentioned are things that Disney can do with spending less money. Bring in a bunch of characters, bring in live performers, food, drink, merch, easy selling it, special events, all that. These are all things they could do quickly. I don't know if they could do them this year, but these are things that by next year, if Disney started now, they could plan it out. You could have Star Wars Weekends in May of next year. You could have a festival at the same time, like they have at Disneyland a bit when they bring in Hyperspace Mountain and everything else. But you could really do it there in May of next year. That's the thing. Long term is where they need to think of adding an attraction. They've talked about doing it in Pandora, which I think Animal Kingdom especially needs it. Same idea with Galaxy's Edge. Yes, Hollywood Studios, great headliner list. Great. If you just call out the headliners, Tower of Terror, Rock and Roller Coaster, Slinky Dog Dash, even Toy Story Mania to a lesser extent, and then the 2 Star Wars attractions, that's a great group, plus Runaway Railway. You need to have that second, you need more Star Tours level in terms of interest attractions. And maybe above Alien Swirl and Saucers. Transport attractions, like what I mean by transport is not you're actually going from one end to the other, though that might not be so bad actually, depending how far you have to walk. What I mean is a slow moving attraction maybe in the water, but just going through adding something, whether it's up high. If you don't want to lose that up high thing, maybe it goes out into the woods. Again, that area that led to where the Galactic Star Cruiser was, that area back there, is there something you could do there? But I want this to be an attraction that everyone can do, or at least most everyone. Less thrilling even than Rise of the Resistance, and one that is going to have a very high throughput. You need to be talking 2,500 people per hour if possible. Something like, I don't know if you can do Pirates of the Caribbean level, but Pirates Haunted Mansion, that level. Not that level of immersion, but that level. And then you need to start thinking about a fourth attraction, like a bigger deal. I would think you want to get a third attraction in like 2 years. So here's kind of my plan looking at it. Kind of a lot of the other changes, talking in terms of characters, terms of food, merch, everything else. That plan is for May 2025. My thought is, if you can get a third attraction in 2 years, May 2026. Again, adding to the festival, everything else, you try to do a third one, make it really expansive, probably not 27, 28. You do it in 28. So again, this is also a good response to Epic Universe. Not response directly, but it's another thing to draw people away from what's going to be very, very enticing for Epic Universe. You can draw people away by offering special events, but really going for it and adding another attraction, not till 2026 probably, but something you can add that is character driven. And what I mean by that is not have 100 animatronics, but something that recalls what we love about Star Wars. You can add a few animatronics, actors, sets, whatever. But just, I'm going to stay kind of vague on this, just given that, you could go so much in depth. But just this, they need a third attraction. So does Pandora. But this one needs it even more. It's like Galaxy's Edge doesn't have its Navi River Journey. And granted, Navi River Journey should be a little longer, has a few elements, but I really like it. But a relaxing, fun, just cool ride that if it didn't have such a long wait, people would love even more. That's how I look at Navi River Journey. And you could have something, and it's also going to take the pressure off of Rise of the Resistance and Smuggler's Run. It's just going to make it even better in the whole land. Continue to make it exciting. There's a little bit with Disney, this idea when they do an expansion, which I'm not seeing with Fantasy Springs, because they have 4 attractions in the 3 lands, and I doubt we'll see with Beyond Big Thunder. But that whole, we did it, we added the attractions, we're done. No. You got to keep at it. You got to keep evolving and not wait until you need to do some massive transformation of Epcot or whatever. You need to constantly be thinking about what are small ways we can make this area better. And Disney, whether it's through Future World Epcot Pavilions, whether it's through Dino Land, Chester and Hester's, doesn't do a great job of kind of thinking a few steps ahead. Like, they spend their budget, then they have to make the money back. And maybe this is one benefit, I hate to say it, of Genie Plus and individual lightning lanes is like, for example, you have a attraction that's not going to be an individual lightning lane, that's going to be like a C ticket level that at least goes on Genie Plus and provides more value for that, which at Hollywood Studios, you need more attractions on there. So maybe that's something I would love if it wasn't even up. There it is. There's the alarm. So that is it. I will just summarize by saying, make the land vibrant and fun. Lots of ways to do it, but that's the main goal of everything I have to look at from Galaxy's Edge. All right, well, I need a little break here, so I'm going to turn it over to a listener. That is Kevin Page, who is known as Parm on Twitter, Figment666, and he has some interesting thoughts about Galaxy's Edge. So take it away, Kevin.
Hey, Dan, my name's Kevin in Orlando. I'm going to slant my suggestions more towards Hollywood Studios, but I think a lot of them would apply to both parks. Namely, more characters roaming around, especially bounty hunters. They should venture into ogres along with stormtroopers, just to kind of give the whole feel of like that there's things actively moving and going on at all times. Hollywood Studios should also get what Disneyland always gets, namely recently the droids and the fireworks show. But it does seem like Disneyland does get a lot of all those little extra pluses, or at least gets them way ahead of Hollywood Studios. Why that is, I'm not exactly sure. They should also already utilize the stages that they already built for the daily shows. Rey fixing her speeder and stuff like that, and then Kylo and the stormtroopers when they come out of the ship. Make that a longer show, make it a little more involved, and run both of those shows like half a dozen times during the day, so it always feels like there's something going on. A full-service restaurant would be nice as well, too. I think they have the infrastructure already for that in place, even before the Star Cruiser was built. Seems like money on the table that they should be able to just do that and make some cash from it. Update Smuggler's Run to something you can actually want to do and be a part of, and something that's fun. I mean, can anything be more drab than stealing fuel? I mean, you have no interactions with any other iconic characters or ships during your mission. Also haven't had multiple paths where sometimes the gunners need to do more work because you have more enemies on one path. Sometimes have the engineers need to do more work because there's tighter spaces, so it's easier to crash. This will make it like an actual interactive Star Tours. And finally, the most obvious thing would be a third attraction. And I know you don't need to specifically respond to Epic Universe, and Hollywood Studios has 2 roller coasters already, but can we get a Star Wars roller coaster already? I mean, the ideas for that kind of seem endless as to what you can do. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I purposely didn't listen that closely to the ideas because I also think it's kind of fun that he also mentioned bounty hunters going into Ogas. So, hey, Disney, it's a good idea. But some really interesting stuff in there, and I definitely wanted to comment on a few points that Kevin made. One is about Disneyland versus Disney World. And I know it's frustrating to a lot of either Orlando locals or even people that go to Walt Disney World more about how it always seems like when they have the coolest stuff, it goes into Disneyland. Like they have more characters, or even when they were, they had the Mandalorian and Grogu and Fennec Shand and Boba Fett and everything. It's always like, we're putting them at Disneyland, or when Ahsoka was there, or, those different characters they've added, and especially recently, like Kevin mentioned, with the droids. And I get it. I think the reason why is because Disneyland is more of a locals park. So that's one element of it. And they think that they need to do more different things. Like you see it with Avengers Campus, where they're constantly adding in characters for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, everything else. Now, I don't know how much that moves the needle as far as annual pass holders, but I think the thought process is that Disney thinks they need to do this more in California, like have more special events, everything else. And they don't feel the need as much in Florida because they feel like they're going to get your once in a lifetime, once every 5 years, rite of passage type guests that maybe you won't get at Disneyland. You're going to get more people that are from around the area. Now, I'm not doing that to excuse Disney. I just think that's part of it. Maybe another part of it is just how things work with the entertainment budget versus Imagineering, and then also with having Glendale right there. Who knows? But I agree with the point. I feel like where you really feel the quietness or just not enough activity is in Florida. It's there in Disneyland too. I'm not saying things are perfect there, but kind of like I mentioned earlier, you really feel the fact that there's just not enough happening in Florida. And part of it is if you were able to bring in special characters on both coasts, even if you rotate them around or something, maybe that would work better. But I know I'm not that familiar with how budgets work and, who has to pay for that and all those things. Maybe when they have a Disney Plus series, they're like, hey, we're just going to do this in one spot because our budget's really limited for entertainment from the series. It gets super complicated, but there are ways they could fix that structure. I also think a sit-down restaurant, which is going to come up more, is still a good idea. I like the idea of just more places to eat, but I do understand that it seems like a missed opportunity where they don't have some sort of themed sit-down restaurant for Star Wars. Especially, they developed all this different type of food again for the Galactic Star Cruiser, and I heard a lot of good things about the food. It doesn't mean you have to bring all that over, but could you bring over some of those dishes? You've already taken the time to design it and put it together. Why not find a way to then connect it? And you could, maybe you're not going to eat there, though that is a whole nother thing we could talk about. making it kind of a day trip or a few hour trip from Galaxy's Edge, have people be able to sign up for that. And that would be an upcharge experience, but maybe not so expensive, maybe a few $100s. And if you could include a meal with that too. That's not what Kevin was saying, but that is something that is interesting. Star Wars roller coaster. I think Disney thinks they sort of have that because they have Hyperspace Mountain playing basically full time in Paris. And then also during the Season of the Force, they have it in California. I rode it when we were there in late May last year. And that's part of it. They don't do that in Florida because they don't have the same visual effects and they don't have the onboard audio. But I do think that the trick there is roller coasters do take up a lot of space. Different than even ideas for dark rides or whatever. I mean, yes, Rise of the Resistance, huge show building. Smuggler's Run, big show building. But I think a third attraction, I'm not sure, maybe they totally have the space. And maybe, but I don't know if it's more complicated to do a roller coaster there. Or, I hate to say it, but if you really wanted to connect something and add a roller coaster and then have Star Tours and have it all kind of connect, that goes right into that Muppet Vision 3D area. And granted, that area is probably not big enough for a roller coaster at all, but you know what I mean. There's some way you could probably tie something in there if it's using the space really effectively, which is not something I really want to see. And Kevin didn't say that, but I do also find that interesting. And like he said, just there's a lot more potential for what they can do, especially with characters and with a lot of other elements. So thank you, Kevin. I know I didn't cover every single point, but I really appreciate the input and hope that some of those things come to fruition. So I'm going to go through a few of the shorter submissions that I got, just really quick messages. I got one from Tom Luft, a longtime listener of the show, who said, pretty simple, add a new themed sit-down restaurant. Surprised that was not part of the original design. I think it will do incredibly well. That is something that I think was expected and may have been part of the designs. Kevin hinted at that too. I do think that they had planned for that, and then they decided to scale it down into Ogas, or maybe there was something connected to Ogas that they were doing. I am sure they've thought about it. This is not something where Disney would hear this and go, wow, this is a new idea. And I'm not picking on Tom. I'm just saying that I think it's a great idea, Tom. And again, it would do amazingly well. And also fits with that idea of almost having Galaxy's Edge be an area you could stay in all day. If you wanted to do Savi's or Droid Depot, but, another way you could say, I want to spend some money, but I'd rather have a really nice dining experience. That's kind of a third, I hate to say upcharge because dining's not really that way, but I'm sure the margins would be great, but a third option there. Similar mode, we had Clay Benton, who is a patron of the Mars Society. Thank you, Clay. Sent me a comment on Facebook Messenger. He said, absolutely fun land, but needs another attraction. Doesn't even need to be an e-ticket, just one more attraction in the land. Also, candidly, would have really loved a sit-down restaurant. Maybe bring over some recipes from the Star Cruiser. Again, I just said that. I'm sure I remembered it in some way, but was not addressing Clay directly. But yes, this is another case where, again, you've already done the work, like I just mentioned, on recipes from the Star Cruiser. Why not find the way to bring them to a sit-down restaurant? Or even, like I said, if you have some outdoor stands or you add a dish to Docking Bay 7 or whatever, there's a lot of different ways to do that. And again, I like Clay's point about that another attraction does not need to be an e-ticket. I think that's a very important distinction because I think the best lands really thrive because they have a variety of different types of attractions. I think about Tomorrowland at the Magic Kingdom. You've got Space Mountain, headliner, Tron, new headliner. Those are kind of your anchors of the land. But then you have the People Mover, a really fun transportation attraction. You have a driving attraction. You have a sit-down theater show with Carousel of Progress. You have an interactive shooting attraction with Buzz Lightyear. You have another sit-down with Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor. And then you also have a spinner with the Astro Orbiter. And then you used to have something in the Stitch's Great Escape Alien Encounter area. And that's just a quick summary of the land. But think of all those elements in there, along with food and everything else. Galaxy's Edge does not need to have that many, though it would be great, but could use another type of attraction. Another attraction that does not take 5 years to build and be a crazy kind of e-ticket attraction. So here's another one from Elwin Hoffman, who sent this over Instagram, sent me a message, said, Galaxy's Edge update suggestion. A water ride could go a long way for Hollywood Studios, which is currently the only park at Disney World with that one. The park is a concrete heat island. I like that phrase. And there isn't much in the way of natural relief. If Disney is ready to fully embrace an ambiguity of time and place in Galaxy's Edge, I could foresee a Dagobah-themed attraction, which would certainly please original trilogy fans. That said, it could be too aesthetically similar to Navi River Journey. Either way, a water ride and some complementary green space could provide a nice oasis in a park currently lacking in natural lushness. First of all, I don't think it's a big concern if it's kind of similar to Navi River Journey. One, because with Star Wars, there's always going to be a different take. And two, they're in different parks. So I don't think, there's similar attractions in multiple parks at Walt Disney World. I mean, too many spinners. But beyond that, so I think the idea of having something that's kind of similar to Navi River Journey has that vibe, hopefully a few more animatronics, but that, again, is more kind of this lush area, could be very cool. And Dagobah themed is really interesting because you could even go into that area that's the dark side of the forest and have it be a little scary, and there's like a Darth Vader in there or something like that. And then you kind of come out and you could do something with Luke, with Yoda lifting up the X-Wing fighter, something like that. There's a lot of different moments that would be really cool to see. So I like that as kind of a dark ride or as a boat ride or something. That's really cool. But overall, a water ride for Hollywood Studios would be amazing. It's pretty surprising. I know that in theory, you'd say, oh, a water ride doesn't really fit when it was more of a studios park. But really, this has basically become like an adventure park. Like you say, I mean, not adventure park like ropes and climbing and stuff, but more like it's similar to Universal. You're riding the movies, you're experiencing something to do with the movies more than anything else. And so a boat ride would seem to be a better fit and getting you kind of a different vantage point of what's happening. You think about how Universal has Jurassic Park, they have Dudley Too, right? And Popeye. But even that land, Islands of Entry, you've got 3 water rides right there. And so, that's a good example, even though that's not a studios park in a way. But Disney does have some ability to have something movie themed that could be a water ride. I really like the idea, Elwin. Thank you for sending it. And again, Toy Story Land is the real concrete heat island, but the entire park kind of has that. So I'm totally with you on that one. Very quick submission by Pete, the Disneyland Bound Goof, who is Gumshoe Goof on Twitter. I would like new missions on Smuggler's Run and a land speeder spinner built like Aladdin's carpet ride with droids spitting on you. Okay, new missions on Smuggler's Run. We're going to keep talking about that, but a land speeder spinner. So if you really want like an A, B ticket level ride and want to put it up quickly, this would be the way to do it. I think about the Jetpacks ride at Shanghai Disneyland or something like that, or even the equivalent of like, not Astro Orbiter because that's up high, but, land speeder spinner, to me, I will honestly say I don't love the idea of adding a spinner. I will say it's better than nothing. Sorry, I don't mean to be too rough on that, but the land speeder idea is interesting. Being able to ride in a land speeder, some sort of way. Maybe it's not the exact traditional spinner, and, droid spinning on you is funny to me. I do find that funny. I don't know how the droid really has water. Maybe he's spitting oil on you. I don't know. But I do like the idea, though, of adding something they can do quickly that's more of an A or B ticket. I think that's a great idea. Whether it's a spinner or something else, or, even the alien swirling saucers type, or, Luigi's flying tires, that kind of thing. Maybe that would be a little more interesting to me, and that's technically kind of a spinner. And again, I don't know if you want that when you already have Aliens Rolling Saucers in terms of Hollywood Studios, and then Disneyland has quite a few spinners. But still, there's something you could do there, and I really like the idea of additional attractions, however you're able to do it. All right, well, I would like to take another break now. So I'm going to play this clip from Courtney and Emily submitted audio. They are from the Book of the Mouse Club podcast. They do a really good job in covering and reviewing a lot of books that relate to Disney and theme parks, both films and theme parks. They also interview authors, and I really enjoy those and bring on special guests like myself and many other people that do an excellent job, and I always appreciate when they participate in projects like this one. So let's do this. Take it away, Courtney and Emily.
Hello, it's Courtney and Emily. from Book of the Mouse Club podcast. Thank you, as always, Dan, for having us come to share our thoughts. And I think we'll have an interesting perspective, as I'd like to say we often do. This one particularly because we're casual Star Wars fans. We're not deep into the lore, so we zoomed out a bit to think how would we approach Galaxy's Edge.
So I'm getting more into it now that my boyfriend, he is a huge Star Wars fan. He's very into the lore, all of the outlets. So I actually turned to him and asked him, because this is what got me to get him to go to Disney. The first time I was like, we're going to go to Star Wars. And he was so excited. And he loved Galaxy's Edge. But I asked him, what would you want to see? And he had an interesting idea that he loves Rise of Resistance. He loves how it's laid out, the multi parts of the attraction. But he thinks that maybe we shouldn't lock Rise of Resistance and Batuu into this like post-new trilogy timeline. He's like, he's nostalgic for the prequels and the originals, and he thinks most Star Wars fans, that's where many people enter, is from those 6 films. So he would like to see, he said a Clone Wars would fit so easily, like how people, like you have people getting captured, Padme and Obi-Wan and Anakin, like the same timeline and the story fits. You can just easily change up where are you in the timeline. And he personally would love to have more connection to the original, the prequels or the original trilogy in those attractions.
You pulled a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and you phoned a friend. I love it. I just noodled on it myself and I came to a similar conclusion of I don't think we should lock ourselves into one timeline. I am an agent of chaos and I want a Jar Jar Binks meet and greet. Like,
I think that'd be so much fun.
Misa down for that so bad.
You just be like, Misa's so happy to see you to everybody.
And Misa would be so happy to see Jar Jar Binks too. I think the character interactions are what make that land for really special. I do like the way that they have approached character meet and greets where it's kind of organic. Like you see Chewie roaming and then he might pull you into a sabacc game. That's definitely something that I witnessed pre-COVID. Or you see Rey up on the roof, that it's not necessarily, okay, we're going to wait in line, take our photo, smile, and leave, that you are drawn immediately into the world. I just feel like, let's go into other timelines. And they're starting to do that because we do have The Mandalorian and Grogu, which my understanding is those are not on the timelines. You know, check me if I'm wrong. But I think they are starting to get that. So that was what was so fun about Star Wars weekends to me. Emily, did you get to do that?
I didn't get to do any Star Wars weekends, but there was still a lot of Star Wars stuff.
I got to do the final Star Wars weekend.
Oh, that's awesome.
That was right after I moved to Orlando, and they didn't mind like what the different timelines were. Like I met Mace Windu, I met Padme, but I also met Luke Skywalker. So it wasn't beholden to just one section of the pantheon that is Star Wars.
One last idea that I had, and this one was mine, not turning to my boyfriend. But one idea I had is something I loved when I was on my DCP was we had in Launch Bay, before we had what we have now, having a whole land, we had the Jawas who would wander around and they had little droid parts.
They were at Star Wars weekends too.
I think that'd be such a great thing to bring back. Like pin trading is such a part of the Disney park experience. But what if you had either pins or bring back those little small droids where you could trade with Jawas throughout the land? So maybe there's certain parts that you can buy, like mystery pins. You can buy certain ones, but there's only certain ones that get traded through the cast members. What if there are things that from the Jawas that you can do? So I think that'd be a great thing to bring back as well. Because I remember everyone having so much fun interacting with them in Launch Bay. I'd love to see them come back.
And I think another thing that's fun is variety. That's kind of at the heart of what we're saying here. You get that with Star Tours and the random missions. I'd apply that to Millennium Falcon as well. Give it a little bit more rewritability. You certainly have that with the different positions, but we don't have to make it the same mission each time. I think one of the fun things about Star Tours is going to the variety of planets and settings. That's a deep part of the Star Wars lore. So add that to Millennium Falcon too.
So Dan, thank you so much for inviting us. I hope everyone has as much fun armchair Imagineering as we did, and we look forward to hearing what everyone else has to say.
I think we kind of sounded like we knew what we were talking about. So there you go.
And to everyone, may the Force be with you.
Thanks, Courtney and Emily. As always, I appreciate the detailed comments and the really cool ideas. You know, what's interesting about Jar Jar Binks, because, I grew up with the original trilogy and didn't see Star Wars in the theaters, but saw Return of the Jedi in the theater. Remember doing that. And then, of course, seeing the, re-releases there and watching it so much on VHS. Oh my gosh, Star Wars. I still quote it randomly without even realizing with like a stay on target or whatnot, just not even thinking about what I'm saying. But so I say all that because I remember seeing Phantom Menace and being so pumped and then just being like, oh, I don't know what I think. And then you watch it again. It's like, no, I don't. And then same with Attack of the Clones. Like, oh, I really want to love this. Oh. And I watched it again recently, and I do think there are elements that when you kind of separate yourself from the expectations, each of the films, Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, and even Revenge of the Sith, all have elements that are really great and then elements that aren't, which is why then when you have references to them that come up or you have Hayden Christensen reappear in Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, it's like, yeah, because there's certain elements that worked great and other elements that didn't work so well. And Jar Jar Binks, though, was one of the ones that I was like, oh, I can't. But having a Jar Jar meet and greet fits with the overall vibe that I was talking about earlier. The vibe of, let's try anything. Let's just do it. And I'm not going to sing Try Everything because, the Country Bears get to do that in a little while. That'll be weird. But just the idea that a Star Wars Galaxy's Edge that's fun and kind of off the cuff and takes everything less seriously would have a Jar Jar Binks meet and greet for some special event, especially the Star Wars Weekend idea, which I know they referenced, which I still love. I love the idea of special events and having them over a period of time and having these different characters. And, it's cool. You could have done it this year for the 25th anniversary of Phantom Menace and had a Jar Jar Binks meet and greet, or had other, elements, again, the Gungans, I'll mention them again, but characters from that movie, you could do it. You could have a Qui-Gon meet and greet. Oh, that would be funny. But the idea of just thinking beyond what's just there in this little box of we are between Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. We have the Resistance, we have the First Order. And again, I even might get behind that if they went all in. But then again, it's still kind of like, well, we don't want to go too all in. The whole Smugglers run's kind of, sort of that way, but not really. It's, and everybody wants more missions on Smugglers Run, so and this is not to say it's not a great idea. It just shows when you keep hearing the same idea that everybody wants more things to do. And I should mention, I didn't reference when Kevin talked about the idea that even getting fuel is boring. And, that's another layer to it. Because part of me could say, well, you just need more missions to get the coaxium. But then there's another idea like, is that even the thing we should be doing? It just, is that what everybody wants to do in Star Wars? And I know it's a way to have the gunner and engineer and pilots involved in it. Also is a way where you're not like killing people. Because that's another thing. I mentioned the Death Star earlier. And the idea, if you blow up the Death Star, you are, in theory, there's a lot of people dying. We're getting fuel. Doesn't really do that in the same way. So that could also be an element of it too. So back to what Courtney and Emily said. I like the Clone Wars idea is also really interesting. Because again, with what Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau and everyone have done with bringing Ahsoka in and giving her a series, with having scenes that recreate moments from the Clone Wars series, with having characters, like you've had that in multiple shows, like Book of Boba Fett, for example, where you have characters come in that were in the Clone Wars, and every time they appear, it livens up the series, or references to Star Wars Rebels, same way. It's just, Ahsoka in a way is almost like a sequel to Star Wars Rebels. I know it's live action, but you have Thrawn and you have her friends and everything else, and it's just, all that is so interesting. And that is an area that, and a lot of people grew up watching those movies in Clone Wars and Rebels. And not that adults can't watch them either. I really want to go back and actually do a watch because I always seem really lost whenever there's characters or some reference to something in Clone Wars or Rebels, and I've only seen a few episodes here and there. So I like that idea a lot too. Getting rid of the timeline, focusing on Clone Wars, or Jar Jar, everything else, really expanding. Because the obvious thought when you go to expand is to say, we're going to expand to the original trilogy. We're going to bring in Luke Skywalker and Chewbacca and Darth Vader and all that. And all that's good. All that's great. No notes for me. I'm good with that. Bring in Ewoks, everything else. And I also like the idea they mentioned of Jawas. We had some fun interactions with Jawas back in the launch bay years ago, pre-Galaxy's Edge at Hollywood Studios. I think it was like 2015, maybe, if I'm thinking that right. Might be a little later. but had some really fun interactions with them. And so that is another case where I'm like, wouldn't it be fun to have them? What if you just had a bunch of Jawas running around the land? And that really isn't locked into the time period. The assumption would be that Jawas are in any time period, right? So it's not like you're immediately taking us out of it or something. What could they be doing like with those droids we talk about? And the Jawas are trying to like prepare a droid or present something, or who knows what it could be. There's so many options. So that's another good one. Thank you so much, Courtney and Emily, for so many great ideas, which I know I've only covered a small portion of them in my responses. I've got one more audio clip in a little while, but first I want to respond to some more detailed comments that I received. We had this one from Martin Smith, who was a podcast guest. He does such great work at Martin's Viz, which you can find on YouTube and other places. And his YouTube videos go really in depth about both current but also past attractions. I love the way he presents them. And he shows like the plans and where everything is and where you are, and then has the best ride-throughs he can have, and has done things with both new. He's did a really good video on Rise of the Resistance and older attractions. So here's what Martin had to say. The land itself seems quite good as a self-contained mini land, enough eye candy to feel it's a land worth exploring. I would add the planned inland table service restaurant. It's a no-brainer. The space is there. The plans are done. Regarding the attractions themselves, I wouldn't add more. There's a great E-ticket and a good D-ticket, and certainly in Orlando, I'd want any spare CapEx to go elsewhere in the park as a new build. I'd like to plus rise. In my opinion, something that stops it being top of the tier is lack of physical effects. Lasers, a bit of fire at the end, a convincing traveling laser effect could easily be done. I'm for hire, WDI. And the post-Ren chaos is calling out for some flames and smoke. Similarly, I think smugglers need some help. For me, the primary issue is using projections. As clever as it is, projections give off no ambient light. The view outside is too dull. It really needs a curved LED screen for the cockpit window. We've seen what volume walls and LED backgrounds could do in The Mandalorian. It would work wonders for this ride. There's also the consideration of rewritability with just a single mission. Legacy characters and locations aside, I think these relatively small changes would work wonders. Awesome, Martin. Really good. Another reference to the table service restaurant, which I think that is an easy way. And again, like I mentioned earlier, Disney makes money for that. It's interesting that he says don't add attractions, instead plus them, which is something I haven't heard from people, but I think it makes a lot of sense. And I love the focus on physical effects, where, again, you're going through it and there's a lot of really cool visual effects, but you don't have as many things really happening. I think about some rides. Universal loves to put fire in every ride and you feel the heat, but right away, something like that immediately brings you into the experience. So if there was a bit of an explosion and you felt the heat, like they did with Great Movie Rides, it's not like Disney hasn't done that either, but something like that could really liven it up, because then you feel like, wow, we're really in danger. We're not just kind of going through this area with a lot of cool visual effects. We're really doing it. And that makes sense. Like, again, after the Kylo Ren animatronic shows up and then it blows out, that might be a good spot for it, really. Or you even have more wind or whatever else. Smuggler's Run. Now, a lot of us want an extra mission, but I found what Martin said really interesting about it. You know, you think about how good, when you watch like the behind the scenes of The Mandalorian, I am still amazed by so many spaces that I felt like they were in an actual place, were actually done in front of, I wouldn't even call it a blue or green screen because it's so much more involved than that with the volume and everything else. So I think that they could find a way to make it feel more lively. I mean, you could convince yourself pretty easily that you're there, but there are probably ways, even just the way that visual effects keep getting better and better and better, things that seemed groundbreaking in 2019 may not seem that way 5 years later. And that's a challenge with the screen-based attraction, or even something like Flight of Passage, which still looks amazing, but looked even better 4 or 5 years ago. So it's that where you still need to continue to update it, and I like that idea. Martin, great job with these comments. Here's one from Jim Caserta, who is a patron, longtime patron, and friend of the show. He says, give me Dengar. One of my favorite elements of Galaxy's Edge is the walk-around characters. Mando and Grogu are incredibly popular. When we first went to Galaxy's Edge Disneyland summer 2019, we had a fun experience with V. Marathi. The problem was, I didn't know who she was. So my first change would be more walk-around characters and leverage the most popular ones. Mando, Ahsoka Tano, Ezra Bridger. Ezra Bridger got a mention. Oh, that's so nice. And some recognizable but obscure ones. Dengar, Bosk, Cad Bane. Cad Bane is a good example, like I said, of a character from the animated series that translated really well into live action on Book of Boba Fett. He shot Timothy Oliphant. How could you shoot him? Really? I mean, he's on Justified. He's on Deadwood. How could he get beaten by Cad Bane? But that shows you, if you have that happen, how good he really was. That's me talking actually now, so I should be clear that Jim's comment ended with Cad Bane, and then I took it away and talked about Timothy Oliphant and everything else. So now back to Jim. Have them really interact with guests and send them on a mission. Maybe get on a transport and go a parsec over to meet with a stranded cruise vessel for a few hours. What the characters add is uniqueness to each visit. To build on that, have multiple missions for Smuggler's Run. Link them to Star Tours. Add in a Force Cave where guests can go back in time and see non-timeline characters like Cassian Andor or Jyn Erso. Have that Force Cave change every few months. The books on Batu talk about links to the Force, and the places have long histories with it, so it's not outrageous. This would have been perfect for the Galactic Star Cruiser, which was actor/character heavy. Shift some of those cast members to inline characters. While this would not be a cheap change, it would involve limited capital expense, can be done very quickly. It's one of those that can be wound down with limited expense. Jim, I like what you're thinking here. It's interesting that you reference again the Galactic Star Cruiser. You know, the idea of getting on a transport. Hey, we've got those buses. They're just waiting. And then you say you're going to a stranded cruise vessel. Oh, that's interesting. The idea that it's stranded or something, and maybe this for a few hours, they got to be considering some of these things. Disney has to be. I just would be shocked if they weren't thinking about that. But then linking to Star Tours, that's interesting. I don't know how you would do that with Smuggler's Run, but that's an interesting idea. And this is the first one. The Force Cave idea is interesting. See, me, I'm just like, don't even worry about it. Just have all the characters around, whatever. But he's actually trying to think of a way that somebody like Scott Trowbridge in that group, who's really like, we want to stick with the timeline, could say, hey, we're not messing around. We have this other area where you can somehow interact with Andor, Jyn Erso, or someone from the past. Interesting. And then I also mentioned this, but Jim's idea to bring cast members over from Galactic Star Cruiser and have more characters. And again, his point, doesn't cost $0, but it doesn't cost $100 million. It costs a lot less than that. I don't know exactly what it would be. It's probably more than I would guess, but still, the idea of having more walk-around characters and making this feel like they can say this is a random outpost in a lived-in environment, but it doesn't always feel like it. And that's a big element too. And budget's really important. Kevin actually had sent me a follow-up message after his clip where he even said that he wanted to say that a new ride would be budget friendly. That's always an issue. And they already have stages. They've got, Smuggler's Run is already set up. So, and even performers, it doesn't cost that much to bring them in. So again, that whole idea I think is commonplace. People aren't thinking just build another Rise of the Resistance. We're thinking, how can we do this in kind of a budget-friendly way? And that's really interesting. All right, let's do another one from Melanie Beasley, who's a longtime listener of the show, always gives great comments on the website and everything else. So here is what Melanie had to say. I gave your question some thought while mowing the lawn today. Oh. My number one wish for Galaxy's Edge is not really possible because it would have to have been installed at the time when the land was built. I'm probably not the only listener who would have loved to be given a people mover type ride there. However, unlike the slower moving people mover, perhaps it could have been built more like the zippy Rocket Rods ride that replaced Disneyland's people mover for a brief time. Instead of a slow moving journey where guests sit side by side, they'd sit more in a straight line, similar to Space Mountain, but with seats that are accommodating to more sizes of guests and to disabled guests as well. These space transport vehicles would take guests on a tour of Galaxy's Edge, allowing them to peek at the insides of buildings like the Droid Factory, Oga's Cantina, the Lightsaber Construction Experience, shops and restaurants, the Marketplace, and the Millennium Falcon queue. I feel like with the massive constructed rockwork that borders the land, the ride could have also gone inside this area and had an indoor portion involving show scenes, animatronics, or screens to give the ride length and variation. The ride could be tame enough for guests of all ages, but have some surprises like a slight launch or a portion that is randomized like in Star Tours. This ride would have increased the budget for the land, but they could have used the money to build it instead of the Star Cruiser Hotel and come out on top. Oh, this is so cool. I love this idea. And I understand, Melanie, that it would be very tough now because the idea of seeing into all these areas, you can't really just cut holes in the wall, basically. But I think it's funny you mentioned Rocket Rod just because that is the ride that killed the People Mover and destroyed that track where then they would have to spend a bunch of money and don't seem to be willing to do it at Disneyland. So it's kind of one of those, like, it never really worked. It's one of those kind of terrible ideas. Ideas meaning with how it resulted, not the idea. But I will say this, Melanie's ideas are not terrible because I still think there's something in here that you could do. Now, you might not be able to provide views into the rides, which is a great part of like a People Mover, but you could still travel around the land. And again, with my new, more vibrant, lively land, there's a lot more to see. So you're traveling around. It would also add more life to the land to have some sort of vehicles moving around the land in some way. Eventually, you go into a show building, like you said, where there is some sort of connection. And yes, you could make it more randomized. Maybe it splits off into multiple tracks inside the show building, where then, depending on, it also allows where, you could go and slow down and have something happen. Like essentially you have like all these, and you have 4 or 5 that kind of slow down and move through it. And everybody kind of goes into like 3 or 4 rows or something. That's really interesting to me. So I feel like you could still do something like this. You might not have the views into some of the areas, but then when you're adding new things, like if they add the sit-down restaurant, everybody wants to see them go by while you're eating. Or anything you add that's new could be incorporated with this. And then maybe there are ways in some form to at least get different views of what's happening with Rise of the Resistance or with Smuggler's Run and do that. Now, again, this is one of those things where Disney's trying to really sell the whole, you are in the Millennium Falcon and piloting, and you are at this real place, or you are doing this. And if you kind of like have this transport thing go by, like the Rise of the Resistance area, like when you're walking with a transport, it might take, but again, that's kind of the idea. I think we can't get so serious or precious about this. We have to kind of change it up a little bit. Well, before I play the audio clip, I have 2 more like text submissions left. So I'm going to do one now. Then I'm going to play the clip, and then I'm going to do the final one, which has a lot of ideas, which I will cover the ones that I haven't talked about yet. Here's one from Brett Nachman from the Notably Disney podcast. Brett does a great job on that show, has interviewed so many cool people who've been involved with Disney books, musicians, composers, and then also other authors, podcasters, so much more focusing on Disney books, music, and attractions. Brett does an awesome job. And if you like my show, you should definitely check out his show. He also was a guest on this show. Would like to have him back at some point in the future, too. Here's Brett. It's hard to believe that Disney theme park guests have been able to visit Batuu for the past 6 years. I, for one, think it brings a vibrance and a whole other level of world building to the Disney destination we love to immerse ourselves in. It's like any other land, though. I see opportunities for enhancement that will further expand the appeal of the land, particularly for non-Star Wars fans, as well as elevate the appreciation among honorary Jedi. First, let's bring more live music to Galaxy's Edge. Hearing some tunes that are familiar and Star Wars inspired would add some flavor to the setting. Disney could employ a few approaches toward this end. A very practical addition that only requires some live performers and not much else would come via percussionists in the vein of the Jammers at Epcot. Using metal scraps and other rough tools and parts, they could play recognizable tunes that could fit in the grungy vibe of Batuu. Very cost-efficient, fun, and effective, all in one. Alternatively, Disney could enlist an intergalactic troubadour who would have a Wookiee woodwind instrument and play some John Williams classics in tandem with telling dark side jokes and quotes. An improvisational actor could play the troubadour and also the ability to play some punny arrangement of Star Wars classics. This all sounds very familiar. It's interesting how Brett and I came up with some similar ideas, so I did not mention the Jammers. But let's continue with Brett's comments. Second, I suggest Disney expand the land a bit, even if only half an acre, to allow for character dining experience that would allow guests to eat with their favorites in the galaxy. There could be areas like Ray's Buffet and Darth's Desert Bar. Disney likes to make money, like any other company, and investing in another dining experience is like a natural win-win situation that does not break the bank to run or construct, for that matter. Third, it's about time Disney enables Galaxy's Edge to take part in holiday celebrations, albeit with a Star Wars edge. The obvious answer to this is a Life Day event around Christmas time, though I would argue that another worthwhile idea comes in the form of Star Wars villains takeover during Halloween. There could be a film update to Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, much in the way that we see alternate versions of other attractions during seasonal periods, as well as additional opportunities to meet the Star Wars baddies. A spooky instrumental score across the land could envelop guests in a unique version of Batuu. The possibilities are endless. Well, those are just several ideas that I have. Look forward to hearing others as well. Thanks, Dan. Wow, Brett, these are a lot of great ideas, and I'm going to try and cover them quickly, but the best I can here. first, the idea of live music, I love that. I know I talked about that earlier, but the idea of the jammers and percussion, I like the idea of him kind of thinking practically. And basically the idea that you don't have to set up some massive setup. You could have people walking around. You could have percussionists that could set up very easily. And the idea of that lived-in experience. You think about Star Wars, and they always talk about, especially the original Star Wars, how everything was kind of lived in. We also saw this a lot in Force Awakens, where they're kind of using whatever they can find on Jakku. Same idea. That is really cool, and I know that is fit with Batuu and what they were trying to do. And then also this idea of, this intergalactic troubadour playing like classics from Star Wars and everything, a little different than what I was talking about, but a similar idea of just adding life to the land. Second thing, character dining. We've talked a lot about sit-down meals, but we haven't really talked about character dining. Now that's really interesting. And again, it's going with the idea of not taking everything so seriously and saying you are that idea they'll live your Star Wars story. They just need to back away a little from that, and I think this is a fun way to do so, where you have characters, and yes, Disney could charge so much. Think how much they charge for Space 220. They could charge more for this, especially with having characters. So, and I actually don't know exactly what they charge because I've never been there because it's really expensive, but I would love to get there and this at some point. But it's another way where, again, you're charging a lot. I think the mistake with the Galactic Star Cruiser was just so much money. You can never get over the price tag. We're here, if you're doing something that's like $100 or $200, yes, I'm not saying I want them to charge so much, but at least you're putting something that seems like, okay, we're going to splurge on something special rather than something that's never going to happen. But the one thing Brett mentioned that I've never heard anyone else is about the holiday celebrations, which I think is really fun, and having Star Wars villains at Halloween or, Life Day at Christmas. There's so many different things you can do, but it does fit with my idea, too, of making this special, having special events, having fun, and just really going for it and not getting so stuffy or so stuck in kind of your ways. You could still have elements of various timelines to make Batuu what it is. It doesn't have to become ridiculous, but you find ways to have special events and make it feel like a place people want to go hang out at, and you don't make everything upcharge. You have things that happen there during the holidays, and not just at Disney. At Disneyland and Walt Disney World, do different things there, but make it super fun. All right, well, now I'm going to play my final audio clip, which is from Tim Grassi of the Marty Called podcast. Tim always does a great job. We've done many episodes, and Tim, of course, whenever he submits these, always goes pretty long, but that's okay, because, I didn't get that many audio submissions, so I'm glad to take a little break. I've been talking for a while, well over an hour, and to get Tim's ideas here, and then I could talk about them. So take it away, Mr. Grassi.
Hello, Dan and the Tomorrow Society listeners. It's Tim Grassi here from the Marty Called podcast. Full disclosure, I'm recording this as my beloved Red Sox are trying not to get swept by Dan's Cardinals. So I wanted to share some general thoughts on Galaxy's Edge and how to update it. I'm sure other contributors will hit on many of the same concepts, but I figured that before I get too deep into some of those expansion possibilities, I think the first order... Did you see what I did there? The first order of business is to fix what's actually there. The biggest issues with the current land are the fixed timeline that has only recently moved out of that Episode 8 Last Jedi timeline, the overall lack of kinetic energy, and that Smuggler's Run doesn't really fully deliver on what we wanted in a Millennium Falcon experience. So, first and foremost, the land can no longer be timeline locked. They've created a 3-dimensional land and added a 4th dimension to it that makes updating elements of the land that much more difficult. You just got to get rid of it. They bent on it a little bit with the Mando and Grogu meet and greet, the Fennec Shand walk around characters, but they need to lean into that much more. They can have characters from all Star Wars eras accessible at different times and or different locations. I really have no problem with them ensuring that Kylo Ren and Darth Vader are out on the same time, but the generic trading post on the outer rim of the galaxy allows for them to not commit to a specific timeline. Let's take advantage of that setup. The other big thing for me that I think can be done rather quickly is that the land needs some sort of additional kinetic energy, and it doesn't need to be that people mover style bantha attraction, although I'd welcome that. But it can be in-universe spaceship drones like we saw at one of the press events. The addition of water throughout the land would just be incredibly helpful. Droids, fights along the rooftop, or some other entertainment experience that would add additional life to the land. If enough in-universe characters are added to the entertainment lineup, that would work. Some of the greatest things that happen in this land are when stormtroopers run into Oga's Cantina. That shouldn't stop there. It should happen in the shops, Docking Bay 7, etc., and it shouldn't be limited to the stormtroopers as well. Any character, any in-universe character can appear throughout the land to further enhance the guest experience. Something else that has long been missing is the Jedi Training Academy. Why not roll that in over here? You need a small stage for it. It doesn't need a huge footprint, and that would add additional kinetic energy to the land as well. So I mentioned Smuggler's Run. They got to do something with this, and I would defer to potentially some other better ideas, but for me, it certainly needs multiple missions, but in a perfect world, I'd change the pre-show and the entire backstory. Let's not have the hero figure be Hondo Ohnaka, somebody that wasn't represented in the films, but you got to go deeper into the Star Wars canon to know who he is. Why can't that figure be Chewbacca? Why can't it be somebody that is a better known character and have that be the story trope? The other thing, the primary MacGuffin in the attraction is coaxium, which has only appeared theatrically in Solo, a Star Wars story. Is that really what you want to do as your point of reference for this? So why not have Han Solo and Chewie send you on your mission? When we go on a Millennium Falcon attraction, isn't that exactly what we want? You can have multiple missions, you can go through the Kessel Run, there's really no limit, but it's got to start with those two. And you can use AI version of Han Solo where they de-age him. You can do something like that. You can have Chewie as the AA. Some combination of those things where you've got a setup of hero AA figure and a screen. I want that to be Chewbacca and Han Solo to introduce the attraction. All right, so moving away from that into some more pie-in-the-sky expansion type talk, there are adjacent spaces where an additional attraction featuring characters from the original trilogy could also be built. There's definitely room for a major addition between Toy Story Land and Smuggler's Run. I'd welcome a ride and an actual sit-down restaurant. If the Star Cruiser restaurant/dinner show experience can be brought to Galaxy's Edge in some capacity, that would be ideal. Other areas for expansion would involve perhaps relocating the Muppets or removing the Muppets, and expanding into the Muppet Courtyard area, and then absorbing Star Tours into the existing Galaxy's Edge area. If you want to get really crazy, you can actually reroute the cast member parking off the intersection of Osceola Parkway and World Drive. That would conceivably allow them to absorb some of, if not all, of the Galactic Star Cruiser into Galaxy's Edge in Florida. I think those last few things aren't going to happen. If I go back to the beginning of what I talked about with those kinetic energy additions, adding more characters, all of that makes the land better tomorrow. They can execute those things with a casting call. So I'm eager to hear what other people suggest. If there's no budget, you can do some of the other ideas that I threw out there, but I want to see some of these entertainment changes. I think that's the easiest thing for them to do, and they can do that sooner rather than later. Thanks.
All right. Well, Tim, I think, did a good job of summing up a lot of the ideas that have come up. Not exactly the same, but in a similar way. So I want to zoom in on a few things he said that haven't really been discussed so far. Big one with Smuggler's Run, and that is the idea of not using Hondo Ohnaka, which for me, I'm just so used to it. It's like that's who they decided to use, and it fits if he's trying to, he's kind of this guy who hires you for the job and you go do the job and everything else. But Tim makes a good point that for most people, not for all, but for a good percentage, this is their introduction to Hondo Ohnaka. Now, in one sense, you could say that's a bad thing. In another sense, you could say, hey, it's a new character for the parks. It's almost, yes, to a lot of people, this is almost like they created a new original Star Wars character, which is not what they did. Obviously he's got a history, and Star Wars fans would be like, oh no, I know Hondo really well, voiced by Jim Cummings. He's somebody we know for sure. But that's not really the case. However, if you're really trying to say, we want to make this the signature Millennium Falcon experience with characters with experiences kind of getting back to what I said about the Death Star, then you would want to put in a character like Han Solo or Chewbacca or whatever else. Now, I don't love the idea of an AI de-aged Han Solo. And I actually mentioned Princess Leia, but it would be the same way there. And I think those are both situations where if you did that, you are possibly distracting from the ride. Kind of like in the movie Rogue One, which is a really good movie, but the scenes with Grand Moff Tarkin don't work. They seem really weird because obviously Peter Cushing wasn't alive. And the scene with Princess Leia where she says, "Now we have hope" at the end, it takes you out of the movie because it's just not believable. And that does happen, not as much with the new trilogy when you have kind of the digital characters, or characters that had a lot of digital effects in a way. But still, it's not something I love there. But because the characters are so well known, it's different than other characters. But you could easily do something with Chewie and then have him talk to Lando. And you could even have him talk to Donald Glover as Lando, which I know people don't have the same connection to that character because of Solo again, or even, if Hondo and Chewie and Lando were there. I mean, Billy D. Williams is still alive, but he's getting up there in age, so he could do something quickly. But obviously, you cannot disguise the fact that he's older. It's the same issue as Harrison Ford, where people are not thinking about it in terms of that. Now, granted, you could just do a voice if you wanted to have that, a voice of Han Solo, where you could. I feel like de-aging the voice doesn't bother me as much. And even I think about the recent Indiana Jones. Some of the de-aging looked really good, and other de-aging of Harrison Ford looked terrible because they had a lot of stuff from the past. So I don't know if I love the idea, but I don't want to zone in on that. The overall concept, I think, is strong. It goes with the idea that if this is to be the definitive Star Wars land in a theme park, these lands are. If you're going to do that, you got to go all in. You got to go for it. And that is the feeling I get with Smuggler's Run. I get a feeling that they were struggling for a while to figure it out. And they really decided we're going to do something new. And at the time, Force Awakens was such a hit when they were developing this Last Jedi made a lot of money. And I'm not going to get into that whole thing because I did enjoy it. But in a way, it was this weird situation because Last Jedi took some different chances. The Rise of Skywalker tried to respond. It ended up even falling flat on its face and everything else, from my opinion. So that actually kind of nullified the impact. People still love Rey, but the Rey they love especially is from The Force Awakens more than anything else, I think. So it's one of those where it's like the characters, you still love them, but you really love them from that first movie when it came back. So Disney deciding we're going to kind of set this more with those movies and we're going to do this coaxium thing. And like Tim mentioned, goes to more Solo. And then we're going to have you do this and we're going to get you the Millennium Falcon, but it's not going to be exactly the type of thing you expect. It's a tricky one. I don't think they would ever do this, but I do think Tim's point makes sense. The Hondo Ohnaka animatronic, like we talked about on the Marty Called podcast recently when I was a guest, is incredible. It's so well done. This is nothing about that. And I think the character is fun and cool. Could you have him, this is my question, not Tim's, and have other characters somehow in it? Maybe. I know Chewbacca's already involved, but Chewbacca kind of crosses the eras anyway, so it's a bit different. It gets a little tricky. I think we all agree that Smuggler's Run, not everyone in the world, but the people that have submitted to this, we've heard enough about Smuggler's Run that people, at a minimum, think you need more missions. A next step would be swapping out characters and changing that up. And a third step would be really changing the entire experience with pilot, gunner, engineer, which, that would be something, And also another layer being the visuals, trying to make them stronger, like Martin talked about. A lot of interesting things about Smuggler's Run. I know we're not solving it here, but I think the ideas are super cool. Another thing Tim said at the very end, the idea of expanding the land all the way to the Galactic Star Cruiser. Interesting. It probably would have to be some sort of transport, but I've always thought about the Galactic Star Cruiser as some sort of upcharge experience, which is kind of what they probably would do. But what about the idea that just like they decide we are going to do such an expansion and we're going to put let's put a people mover that takes you from Galaxy's Edge to the Star Cruiser that runs constantly. And granted, the line would be huge. But, I don't know how that would even function. This is, again, total blue sky. I don't even call this blue sky. This is called, pipe dream. But takes you to the Star Cruiser, and then there's an attractions there. And it's not an upcharge experience. Yes, they have They have a sit-down dining experience, and they have shops, and they can make all the money there. But they gut the rooms, and they put attractions there and have it be a second land, kind of like how you take the train in the Animal Kingdom Conservation Station, but done to a much better degree. Such a cool idea. I don't think it would ever happen, but it's such a fun idea. And that's the reason I did this show, is for fun ideas. And I know Tim mentioned a lot more, but in the instance of time, I still have one more response I need to hit, which I'm going to do right now. This is from Trevor B., also a patron who sent me an email. And this is a long one, so I'm going to try and go through it quickly, and then I'll read the whole thing, but then I'll circle back on the things that I wanted to mention that we haven't really talked about so far. Okay, here's Trevor. Being born in the 70s, I am a huge Star Wars fan, but have to admit the Galaxy's Edge just always seemed a bit off for me. Like many, I'm tied to the nostalgia of the original films, although I do enjoy all the movies on some level, but seeing the Millennium Falcon in person the first time had the largest emotional effect on me in the land. The level of detail in the land is incredible, and Rise is my favorite ride on property. Here are some thoughts on the land. These are done in bullets. Add Star Cruiser-like experiences, mini live role plays, but a 2 to 3 hour experience. Lightsaber training like Luke in the training remote from A New Hope. Add a VR experience like the Void had at Disney World. I did this and thought it was amazing. The technology was 10 years ago. Bring back Jedi training for kids. My son does this at Disney World, and I still say to this day, well, if you don't make it through college, at least you could fall back on your Jedi training. Character dining. The Star Cruisers seem to have the food already. Just add characters. Use the Space 220 style screens. Improve Oga's Cantina. We went there, but there were so few tables. So few seats, and the high tops table didn't work. We were there after waiting in line 2 hours for Slinky Dog, and my wife said, finally we could sit down, to which I said, well, actually, we left after a quick drink. I think that experience is common. This is Dan saying this. Merch. The fact that I'm never tempted to buy anything says something. With the timeline limit is none of the Era merch or Galaxy's Edge brand items interest